Hello and welcome. My name is Jennifer Kate. In this presentation, I'm going to talk to you about how to pick a service dog, how to pick a dog that you can train or have trained to become your service dog. Picking the right dog to begin with is absolutely critical. Not every dog can make a service dog. Actually, very few dogs can make a service dog. And one aspect of service dog training that a lot of people underestimate is the ability of the dog to go out and perform in public. See, training the tasks generally is not a problem. What makes or breaks a service dog is whether or not that dog can go out in public, can go out safely, and can actually perform out in public settings. Most service dog organizations have a fairly high rate of dogs that don't make it through their program. So when you start this journey and when you're looking for a dog to train as your service dog, it's important to have a plan in place in case that dog does not work out. Before we talk about how to select a dog to be a service dog, let's first take a look at what makes a great service dog. When a service dog goes out in a public place, our goal is for the service dog to not bother other people. And this is really important. So as trivial as it might seem, it's best if the dog looks friendly. Fewer people will be scared of the dog and fewer people will raise concern and give you trouble. The other consideration is that there are certain states as well as certain airlines that restrict certain breeds. So even though you might be protected by federal law and ADA law, you might find yourself in all sorts of legal battles to be able to keep your dog or take your dog either on a plane, on certain airlines, or in certain states. Now your dog must be friendly with both people and with dogs. You cannot take a dog out in public that is not friendly. This is a matter of public safety. We can't put people at risk. And if people are going to come up to your dog, and they will, you must have some assurance that your dog is going to be okay. Along those same lines, your dog must be confident enough to be able to go out in public and focus on the tasks and on you and not be concerned for his or her own safety. If the dog is constantly concerned about certain noises, certain people walking by, certain things like sliding doors or carts, they're not going to be able to notice if you have a change in your physiology or if you have a particular need. They're going to be mostly centered on trying to stay safe. So really what we're looking for is kind of an easygoing dog, happy to be around people, and that can adapt to all sorts of situations. A very strong interest in food is also going to be important. With a service dog, you can't reward the dog with a tennis ball or with a tug toy when you're out in a mall. So drive to work for food is going to make your tasks a lot easier. We're going to ask for them to perform at a very high level with all sorts of distractions. And if your dog has only a mild interest in treats and is very picky, it's going to be difficult. We're also going to look for a dog that has kind of a medium energy level. If the dog is too laid back and lazy, that dog may be very easy to live with, but when it comes to getting up and performing a task, it may think twice before it does it. If a dog is high energy, on the other hand, that dog would be difficult to take out if you go to a movie or a restaurant or you take the dog at work and the dog is always on the go, then it's going to have a hard time settling. The dog should also have a natural desire to want to stay close. And that's especially true if you need a dog to alert to a medical condition. So a diabetes alert dog or a seizure dog or any dog that needs to be able to alert to a change in your physiology is going to need to stay close to you at all times. And we can't make that happen. We need a dog that naturally wants to follow you around. It's the type of dog that may follow you to the bathroom or just gets up and follows you anytime you're on the move. A dog that is very sweet but too independent may be quite happy to lay in the other room or lay in the backyard and won't recognize when you have an issue and you need help. Here are some of the things that a service dog cannot be or cannot do. For one, a service dog should not scare people or guard their person. Dogs that have been specifically trained for protection cannot be service dogs. We also talked about how important it is for the dogs to be friendly with strangers. And here again, if you have a dog that needs to warm up to stranger, or you're looking into a dog from a breeder or from a rescue, and they say, oh yes, the dog is very friendly, but it takes a little while before the dog warms up to a stranger, that dog does not have the right qualities to be a service dog. When you go out in public, what you'll find out is that there are lots of people, especially dog lovers, who'll come up to the dog and want to pet the dog. Most of the time they'll be polite and ask if they can pet. Sometimes they will just go ahead and pet the dog. And what happens if the dog is a little bit shy and needs to warm up, that dog is gradually going to develop more and more anxiety about being out in public and is going to start looking at people as a potential a possibility for discomfort and is going to start developing some protection behaviors. If the dog isn't comfortable around all sorts of people, then the dog may start developing fears and anxiety, which can turn into reactivity long term, or the inability to work and focus on the task. So in general, we don't want a dog that's anxious when out in public. Now, when you first take a dog out in public, that's very natural, especially if you just got the dog out of a shelter. The dog is going to feel very overwhelmed, and so you'll have to introduce the dog very gradually. But after a while, we want to see that that dog is absolutely confident, capable of focusing on you, is taking treats, and just wants to say hi to people. I mentioned this in the previous slide. A high-energy dog is a difficult dog as a service dog. Not that it can't learn the task, it's just that it's going to have a really hard time settling if you go out in public and in a restaurant and places where you just want the dog to chill. So what we're looking for in a service dog is really a dog that, with some training, will not create issues to others when taken out. You really want that dog to be rather invisible. It's not going to potty, it's not going to bark at people, it's not going to be an inconvenience to other people. So when you're inquiring about a dog, think about how the dog would do if you're out with the dog at a very busy mall. There's people everywhere, there's moms with strollers and babies and people coming at the dog and petting the dog. How is the dog going to react in a setting like that? So the questions we ask ourselves when assessing a dog is, how does the dog assess according to the 3 levels of safety? Is the dog safe to take out in public? Or is the dog potentially going to cause a problem to somebody? Does the dog feel safe going out in public? Not only is it not productive and unlikely to work if the dog is anxious and not comfortable in a public setting, but it's also unethical and unkind to try to force a dog to go out in public when it's just not comfortable. Not all dogs are made to be service dogs, no matter how much training we put on them. And then finally, we ask ourselves, is that dog capable of keeping his person safe? Because ultimately that's really the goal. Is the dog going to be able to perform the job for which we want to train it? So is the dog really independent or very focused, food-driven, and capable of learning the tasks that we're going to train it for? So a big concept to understand here is that we cannot take project dogs. Dogs that have certain behavior issues that are incompatible with service work should not be considered. Many people have the illusion that as a trainer you should be able to train the dog to do anything and modify any behavior issue. And although we can indeed modify behavior, you can only go so far. A lot of the behaviors are influenced by genetics, and you can certainly help a dog gain more confidence if it's skittish to begin with, but how long is it going to take you? And how confident will the dog be? There is no guarantee that the dog will ever be confident enough to do the task. So you may end up putting hours, if not years of work in a dog, and in the end not have the service dog that you need. In living beings, temperament is influenced by both the genes and the environment. So the genetics will influence how the dog is going to react to the environment. And then in turn, the environment will also influence how the dog reacts through interactions and experiences. But the saying, "it's all about how we raise them," is simply not true. Many behavior traits are very much influenced genetically. And there are dogs that have been raised with everything absolutely perfect and they're still skittish. And other dogs that have had a really harsh life and have been mistreated and yet are friendly and happy and easygoing as could be. So how and how much the environment is going to affect one trait or another is completely determined by the dog's genetics and background. And genes will influence a number of factors, such as resilience. How much does it take for a dog to react to something? How adaptable is the dog? A lot of fears and anxieties are also influenced by genes. The energy level is definitely breed specific. We know how energetic most border collies are, for instance. Friendliness and sociability is most definitely falls into that category. Some breeds or some lines of dogs are a lot more shy than others. And then food drive, if you have been working with dogs for a while, you've probably seen or know that labs will work for pretty much anything. And on the other hand, some Goldens are a little bit more picky. So with that, we can ask ourselves, does breed matter? Could any dog of any breed be a service dog? Well, overall, there are many dogs that can be service dogs, even dogs of a very unusual breed. We have placed, for instance, a very successful husky as a diabetes alert dog. Now, that's not necessarily typical, though. So, going back to the criteria that we discussed previously, what you want to be careful of are dogs that are too independent, such as Great Pyrenees, or Akitas, or Chows, or Huskies, Shar-Peis. Those dogs may be quite content to be in the backyard, and if you're having a seizure or dropping your glucose levels, they may not even recognize it. Some highly independent dogs are also more likely to try to escape, and when you've put a lot of investment in time and money, sometimes also for your dog, but also when you need your dog on a day-to-day basis, that is something that could have dramatic effects on your life. We go back to the energy level also. So breeds of dogs that are too high energy, like Border Collies, Australian Shepherds, Dalmatians, Weimaraners, dogs like that don't typically make service dogs. And again, all of these are guidelines, so there's always exceptions in every breed. And if you can find a calm and clingy husky, which is what we had found for that diabetes alert dog, that's great. You know, that dog may absolutely work. But in general, the percentages of dogs that do work in these breeds is lower than in other breeds. You also want to stay away from dogs that are naturally leery of strangers. Dobermans, for instance, or Rottweilers or Mastiffs don't necessarily make good service dogs when they're leery of strangers. We have talked about why already. You want a dog that you don't have to be on the lookout for strangers who might pet your dog, because then it's an anxiety source for you. If you're constantly being careful and constantly trying to avoid people coming to your dog because there might be an accident, it makes your life really difficult, and that dog really should not be in public to begin with. So here are some of the breeds or breed mixes that have the highest incidence of success when becoming a service dog. So English Labrador is at the top of the list because they have the food drive, they have the friendliness. Now we're talking about the English Lab, not the American Lab, and there is a difference, and those dogs are almost like two different breeds because they're so different in terms of personality. Golden Retrievers also have made very successful service dogs, and again, this is a matter of percentage-wise. I have met plenty of Golden Retrievers or Labradors that couldn't be service dogs, but again, we're talking about statistics, so there's a higher percentage of those breeds that can make it than in other breeds. And finally, Poodles and Doodles. They are very popular in the service dog world. They're at the bottom of the three, though, because they can have certain traits that are sometimes problematic. Poodles and Doodles can be a little bit too anxious and more vocal than some of the previous breeds. In general, and this may come as a surprise, you want to stay away from any working line of dogs. So dogs that have been bred to work are generally going to be higher in energy and higher in anxiety, and certain drives also may be problematic for service dog work. American labs, also called field labs, that have been bred for hunting are also going to be a lot more energetic, more anxious when you take them out in public. They're generally, they have certain drives, like they have a very high prey drive, so they percentage-wise don't make as good dogs as English labs. And they look physically different. So the American lab is leaner, has a leaner and longer face, where the English or show lab is broader, has a very large face. So they physically look different, but they also have big differences when it comes to temperament. And the same goes for golden retrievers or German shepherds, where again the working lines are going to be sometimes hyper focused on certain things. A lot of German shepherds that are bred for working are obsessive about balls, for instance. They are constantly on the go. They're very anxious animals, and for the most part, they do not make good service dogs. Another consideration when thinking about getting a dog to be your service dog is size. Does size matter? We often hear of people who want to have very large dogs because they need the dogs for mobility assistance, like a Mastiff or a Great Pyrenees. The truth is, if you look at most service dogs and how large they are, most of them are Labradors, and they really don't need to be much larger than that unless you have very specific features that would require that. But in most cases, a typical size Labrador can do most mobility tasks. And why size matters is that when you start taking your dog out in public, there's all sorts of places where if you have a very large dog, that dog is going to be in the way, is not going to fit nicely under a table, is going to be hard to take on a plane, and it's just going to make your life a little bit more difficult. A very large dog is also going to draw more attention, and believe me, when you go out in public, getting more attention than you're already going to have with a service dog is not necessarily what you want. Another consideration is how long a large dog lives. So the larger the dog, the shorter the longevity. And for a service dog, that can be a big problem. At Medical Mutts, we favor dogs that are in between 40 to 60, 65 pounds. We sometimes go up to 70, but rarely. Sometimes a smaller dog is also an option. If you're looking for a dog that is going to alert you for diabetes, for instance, then the dog may do its job just as well as a small little dog. The big question again is all about temperament. Can that dog go out in public? Is that dog going to be barky and go after people out in public? Or is the dog going to be confident and social and easygoing? So what about age? Well, dogs become adults when they're about 2 years old, and that's an average, of course, because there are breed differences. But in general, a dog is considered a fully trained service dog when it's at least 1.5 to 2 years old. And the reason for that is not so much in how much time it takes to train them, because most service dog programs will put the tasks and all the training in 6 months, even if they claim to have them for 2 years. The first part of the dog's life has been mostly with volunteers, just exposing them to the world. And it takes about 6 months to train a service dog, and they really can't be trained at any age. They're perfectly capable of learning all the tasks at 6 months, and they're also capable of learning them at 6 years. But there are a few things to consider when it comes to the age. The first thing is, especially if you're considering getting a puppy, dogs go through adolescence. And just like people, when they go through adolescence, they can experience big changes in their temperament. I have been training service dogs for many years now, and I have seen lots and lots of dogs that have started out as great puppies that came from service dog lines and ended up developing behavior traits that were incompatible with being a service dog. Were very friendly puppies, all of a sudden started becoming leery of strangers and potentially bark at them. So one thing to really keep in mind when you're embarking on this journey and deciding whether or not you want to get a dog to train as your service dog is that many of them won't make the cut. And even very reputable service dog organizations that use dogs from service dog lines and with all of the right socialization and training, still half of the dogs won't make it. Now, there are advantages and disadvantages of getting a puppy. First of all, you have a certain level of control over the dog's environment and exposures because you're going to be doing it from the very beginning, from the time you get the dog out of the breeder. And that has value because you can expose the dog in all the right ways. You can make sure the dog has all the experiences that it's going to need, and you're going to be completely in charge of that. Another advantage is that you can get information about the parents, about their temperament and about their looks, and that can give you some really good insight into what your puppy is going to turn out like. The puppy is also going to be completely adapted to your home. You're getting a fresh new puppy. It's like having a baby, and your puppy is going to grow up in your house. So the dog is going to be very comfortable with your family and with your household or any pet that you might have in your house. And another advantage is that you can start the training immediately and avoid the development of some of the bad habits, so you can get the dog started all the right way right from the get-go. Now, there are some disadvantages about getting a puppy. For one, the puppy is going to go through all of the different puppy stages, all the developmental stages, and so you're going to have to be prepared to put in a lot of work, especially at first, with the potty training and the crate training and the bite inhibition and all of those fun things that come along with having a puppy. And then you might put a lot of work and investment in training your puppy and notice that there's big changes in the temperament of that dog, where sometimes the progress is going to be linear and go up, and then all of a sudden the dog is refusing to do something that you had taught him and that he was really good at. And those changes can sometimes be very frustrating, so you have to prepare that that's something to expect. The other big disadvantage of getting a puppy, and this is something that you'll need to prepare for, is that there is a chance the dog may not work out as it goes through adolescence. So then the question becomes, what are you going to do if it doesn't work out? And you have to figure out a contingency plan. Are you going to be able to keep the dog and add another dog to your household and try again? Or are you going to have to rehome the dog? So what if you don't want to get a puppy and would like to start with getting an older dog? And sometimes getting an older dog is actually a safer option. We like to get dogs between 1 and 2 years old. That way they are well into adolescence and we have a fairly good idea of what the dog's temperament is going to be like. The dog is also going to have plenty of time to work after it's been fully trained. So between 1 and 2 is really a perfect age, 1.5 being the ideal. So let's look at some of the advantages of getting an older dog. For one, you can test the dog thoroughly and get a very good idea of what the dog's temperament is like. What is it reacting to? How does it react? What is the energy level of the dog? Is the dog potty trained? All of those questions you can figure out fairly quickly. You can take the dog out for a walk and see how it reacts to strange dogs, or how does it respond to a stranger walking by? Is it trying to move away from the person, or is it pulling to say hi? The dog also doesn't need to go through all the puppy behaviors, so you're saving some time and you can go straight into training. With an older dog, costs are also reduced because most of the time the dogs come with a full medical record, so they've been spayed or neutered and they're generally up to date with their shots. You can also test them for hip dysplasia, which is something that you can't do with a puppy. Now, there are also disadvantages of getting an older dog. One of them is that you don't necessarily get to know the past of the dog or get any information about the dog's parents. And this means you're going to have to rely on testing to find to get the information that you need about the dog. The other thing, too, to understand is that finding the right dog is not an easy task. It's going to require a lot of research both with breeders that sometimes can sell an older dog or in rescues and shelters. But before we go more into details about what to look for in an older dog, let's go into some of the frequently asked questions about older dogs and some of the myths that sometimes we have. One of the things about older dogs is that they bond with their new owner very strongly. So a lot of people have concerns that if they don't take a puppy, that dog is not going to like them much and is not going to really bond with them. And that is very far from the truth. In fact, when dogs have been abandoned, very often they bond even stronger with their new person. But even when the dog has gotten very good care for the past years, it still is very likely to bond with a new person. Dogs are going to bond with the people who care for them, who are going to provide them with everything that they need, and that includes safety and love and food and play. In fact, most service dog organizations place dogs between 1.5 years and 2.5 years old. So the dogs are young adults already by the time you get the fully trained service dog. And I have placed hundreds of service dogs, and I have not seen dogs and people have a hard time bonding with one another. Quite the contrary. The other idea that I often hear from people is that because the dog had a history, we don't really know what it's going to react to. Well, that's the whole purpose of testing the dog. And the testing doesn't just happen at the shelter or at the breeder's place. The testing must go on for several weeks. And if you do it right, you actually have a lot more predictive value than with a young puppy. And then finally, just because the dog was at a shelter or a rescue and somebody gave up on it, does not mean that there was anything wrong with the dog. Some people just can't care for their dog at some point. Maybe they had life changes. One of the biggest reasons for surrender is moving. People move to a different state, a different house, and they can't take the dog with them for some reason. Sometimes the previous owner died or just had a big change lost their job, for instance, and couldn't afford to have a dog anymore. So there was nothing, it had nothing to do with the dog itself. We even found dogs in kennels and rescues and shelters that clearly were abused. Some of them were extremely skinny or had their teeth broken from being overcrated, and they turned out to be fantastic service dogs. So where do you get an older dog? Well, there's two main sources for that. One is a breeder. You can go to the breeder, and some breeders keep dogs a little bit too long, a little bit longer. Maybe they wanted to breed the dog and they ended up changing their minds, so now they have the dog available. Or maybe the dog didn't completely fit their criteria. Maybe both ears were not exactly at the same length, or the dog had just a little bit of the tail was a little bit too high, and so they didn't want to reproduce that dog, and they can't show the dog either, and so they're willing to part with the dog even if they kept it for about a year. We just recently got a dog, a 1-year-old dog, from a breeder who had considered keeping that dog as her own service dog. And then things changed for her and she's no longer in position to or in need to have a service dog, and so she was willing to part with the dog. Another obvious source for adult dogs are rescues and shelters. And we'll cover how to go about getting a dog from a shelter in a little bit. But in both cases, there are a few things to think about before considering getting a dog. And one of them is, what happens if the dog doesn't work out? Are you willing to keep the dog and get another one? Or are you going to be able to work out a situation like a foster to adopt, which is what we typically do at Medical Mutts? We get a dog from a rescue and we have a period of time during which we can try the dog out before we decide whether or not we want to fully adopt the dog and bring the dog into our program. So what I'm suggesting here is to really think hard before getting a dog so that you have a contingency plan in place. Maybe a relative can take the dog. Maybe you can return the dog to the breeder or to the shelter. but you want to make sure that you have something in place in case it doesn't work out. So let's consider that you have decided to get a puppy. You want the puppy adventure, they're cute, they're fun, and you would love to experience the puppy age and just do it right from the beginning. So how are you going to choose a breeder? So we want to go back to what our criteria is. We need a dog that is confident and social. So it's always best to have a puppy that has been exposed to a whole lot of things while it was growing up. A puppy that is raised inside a house is going to hear all sorts of things. People coming and going, phone conversations, the television, people maybe screaming sometimes, things dropping, and all of these things are going to become routine for the dog. Some very good breeders also understand the importance of exposure, and they will actually add all sorts of things for the puppies in their pen. So things to climb over, to go under, things that make different sounds, and so all sorts of stimulations, including sometimes different surfaces for the puppies to go on. And all of those early experiences will help a puppy develop confidence and just kind of a nonchalant attitude about different things and a better capacity to adapt. You'll also want to inquire and meet the parents, because at this point there is really no accurate test that can give you any kind of predictive value about what the dog is going to be like as an adult. You can weed out the extremes, so you can weed out the very shy and the very, very bold, but that's about it. You can't really assess a puppy at 8 weeks old and decide that that puppy would make a really good service dog. The test has not yet come that can have that value. So your best chances are to ask about the parents. If you can meet the parents and look how they respond to you, you're a stranger, so you have that benefit, is to see how the dogs are going to react to you. Are they friendly? Do they need to warm up to you? How do they react in general? It's best if you can meet them outside of the property, because in the property the dogs are going to be more confident overall. So if you can meet them outside, and then ask open-ended questions. You know, what scares the dog? What is your dog afraid of? Or what can you tell me about the dog's temperament? And if you hear things such as, well, the dog is super friendly, he needs to warm up a little bit to people, but overall he's very friendly, he does very well. Things like that are a little bit of a red flag. Because again, you don't want a dog that's going to warm up to people. You want a dog that's going to just be easygoing and that you're not going to have to worry about whether or not he's going to be comfortable. Now, these are all general guidelines. There's always a little bit of leeway, of course, and it's always a matter of degree. And with dogs, there's not much black and white. Everything is in shades of gray. So you may have a dog that takes 10 minutes to warm up to people, and a dog that takes just a few seconds and is okay. So all of these things are, of course, to take into consideration. You'll also want to choose a breeder that has some kind of guarantees, or that at least checks into health issues such as dysplasia, hip and elbow dysplasia. They are a lot more common than you would think, and it's going to be important to screen for that, because you don't want your dog at 5 years old to be crippled and incapable of working for you anymore. And you'll want to stay away from a breeder that has a nice fancy website but is very quick to offer to meet you somewhere, probably halfway for your convenience. Well, the reality is a lot of those breeders don't want you to go to their house, because that's a great way for them to hide where the puppies are actually growing. And puppies that are raised in the basement or come from puppy mill and that have not been exposed to a lot are likely to be a lot more shy. Now, that doesn't mean you can't have the exception. Again, there's a lot to say about genetics, and some puppies are very resilient no matter what they've been through. But this is just, again, if you want to put all your ducks in a row and make sure that you have the best chances to have the service dog that you need. These are just general guidelines that we recommend following. So when it comes to picking the puppy, again, as I said, there's no real test that could give you much predictive value about the puppy. So your best predictor is finding out as much as you can about the parents. So ask about their reactions to strangers, or they be left alone in the house? How would the breeder describe them? Are they kind of lazy? Are they always, do they like to go out and move a lot? How do they react to loud noises? And if they're afraid, how quickly do they recover from being afraid? And when you're looking at the puppies, don't take the puppy that appears fearful and avoidant. You want the puppies to be social and confident. And it's best if you can bring the puppies one at a time in a location that they have never been. And sometimes the breeder will have a garage or a different room or outside, and they generally have some way to accommodate you and to be able to do that. And you're going to look at what are the differences between the puppies and how quickly do they adapt to the new room. Are they timid and hardly move around? Or are they hiding under, and on the sides of the room and don't really want to come out? Or the opposite, are they just happy and go lucky and just want to explore once they've kind of got their whereabouts together? And then look at how quickly the puppy wants to come towards you. How much effort do you need to make for the dog to come to you? Do you have to call and call, or is the puppy naturally wanting to interact with you? You can also place a strange object on the floor, like an umbrella or a bag or something that the puppy has never seen before, and watch how quickly it investigates the object. And some puppies may completely stay away from it, and from there on out not want to move from under a chair, and some puppies are curious and want to investigate, and those are the ones that you want. Now, how do you go about picking an older dog? So as we said, there are a couple of options for picking an older dog. There are breeders, rescues, and shelters. And our criteria is always going to be the same. We're looking for a confident dog, a friendly dog, a food-motivated dog. So here we can test for food drive. With puppies, it's a little bit more unreliable. And we also want a dog that naturally wants to stay near you and interact with you, even though you're a stranger. So when we're going to the shelter, what we want to see is that the dog wants to interact. It's not staying in the back of the crate. It's appearing friendly, wagging its tail, leaning against the cage, and taking treats and wanting the interaction. Here we see a dog that's obviously pretty friendly. It's happy to come in and forward and interact with the trainer. It's even seeking more. This guy is seeking even more interaction, offering a sit for the treat, and willing to follow treats into position. So here's the opposite, a dog that really looks very afraid and won't come over, as opposed to a dog here again that's doing everything that she can to get the interaction and the petting. It's also good to stand up and look straight at the dog and see how the dog reacts. Notice the change of reaction here, where the dog suddenly is barking and very defensive. But if the dog is still standing there, not appearing fearful, taking treats, wagging its tail, looking friendly while you're looking at him, standing in front of him, maybe waving your arms in all sorts of directions, then that's a really good sign that there's potential there. So if the dog does well in the kennel, then you're going to look at how the dog reacts when you walk it down the aisle. Now here, if you're in a shelter, it's likely the shelter staff that's going to do that, but you can still watch how the dog is responding to the dogs barking at him as he's passing by. And most shelters and rescues have a place for you to go and interact with the dog, whether a room or an outdoor pen. And that gives you a chance to evaluate how quickly does the dog take to come and look for interaction with you. Is the dog more interested in looking around and sniffing? And they're going to do that at first, but how quickly and how fast do they want to interact with you? And this will give you an idea of how social the dog is, because again, you're a perfect stranger to this dog. And sometimes you'll take a dog out and the dog will not want to be with you at all. Other times the dog is willing to be with you, but if you look in the case of this one, she is a lot more concerned about the dogs around. Her hackles are up, her body is stiff, and what she's telling us is that she's not very comfortable with other dogs. And since attraction and food drive is important, you're also going to want to assess how much food drive the dog has. So what we do is we place a treat under our hand and we see how long it takes for the dog to get to the treat. How long is the dog willing to work to try to get the treat? And some dogs will work hard at it while others will give up really quickly.
Do you want food, buddy? Or will you hold still long enough to find out we have food?
You'll see that this dog here is willing to take treats, but abandons them very quickly and would rather run around and look at the other dogs. So this dog would not be a good candidate on that measure.
Hi.
We also want to have a sense of how the dog is going to react in a new environment or with new objects, because that's basically what a service dog is going to have to face. And so we bring in different objects. Here you see a dog with an umbrella, and we look at how quickly do they want to investigate the umbrella, how afraid they are of the umbrella, and if they are afraid, how quickly do they bounce back? Are they just done and that's it? Do they go after the object? All of these things are going to give us a really good understanding of how the dog is likely to react faced with a stranger or a strange situation. What we want to see is that even if the dog is startled or surprised by the object, that the dog will recover quickly and will be willing to investigate and have a certain curiosity about it. But how the dog reacts also gives us a lot of information. Like this dog is backing up and barking. Well, if somebody looks a little bit funny, or if there's something in the environment at a mall that scares him, that's a likely reaction from this dog. And so this dog clearly here is not a good candidate. And no matter how much the trainer is trying to reassure the dog and entice the dog to come close to the object, the dog is just not having it. So once you've found your ideal candidate, the dog that has shown friendliness and desire to work with you and interact in a friendly manner, and was not too scared of the objects that you presented, it's time to bring the dog home. At first, you want to expect the dog to be a little bit more excited than normal, or the opposite, be calmer than normal. Sometimes it takes 3 to 4 weeks for a dog to really show its true colors. It's what we call the honeymoon period. And during that time, the dogs can be calmer because they're shut down and stressed, or more anxious for the same reason because they're still high on adrenaline. And they may not react to things or they might, on the opposite, react to things that generally wouldn't trigger them. The dog might also have accidents. It's a new environment, a new home, and sometimes the first few days are a little bit difficult. And then also expect the dog to be a bit anxious at first when left alone. They've gone through a whole lot. This is very traumatic for a dog, and sometimes they can have a little bit of anxiety about being left alone. And after a few days, you'll want to start taking the dog out. And you're going to want to look for opportunities where you can see the dog react to different things, like strangers. How does a dog react to people, men, women, people of different color, different sizes? How does the dog react to other dogs on a leash? Some dogs are very friendly to other dogs, but when they're on leash, they can be reactive. They can suddenly start pulling and lunging and barking at other dogs. You'll also want to see how the dog reacts to other animals, like cats or squirrels. And loud noises are another concern. If you take the dog out to a hardware store, for instance, where people are likely to drop things, or if you can have the opportunity to watch the dog through a storm, how does the dog react? Because sometimes noise sensitivity could develop into a bigger problem when you take the dog out in public. And then let's not forget to make sure we also assess how willing the dog is to work for treats. Is the dog very willing to work for treats in the home, but then when you take him out, he's not interested in anything? Or is the dog very eager to work for treats? So how much and how little the dog is willing to work for treats is going to give you an idea of how trainable that dog is and how much effort the dog is going to be willing to put in when it comes to training. And after the honeymoon period, after you've really assessed the dog and feel comfortable with the dog, that's when you'll want to contact us and schedule the assessment. We'll discuss what your needs are and help you get started. Again, our website is medicalmutts.com. You'll find all the prices for different programs and our contact information.